Okay, hello everyone and welcome back to World of Tanks Blitz, and I am going to be here in a garage review of my most recent tier 10 tank, which is this thing, the VK7201K. It is the latest German heavy tank to come into the game, and it replaced the Maus as the replacement for the final line of the VK4502A/B at tier 8 and 9. Here we go. So yeah, it replaced the Maus, and it makes more sense because this thing is a rear turreted tank, this thing's a rear turreted tank. The Maus, you know, it made sense to give the Maus its own dedicated super heavy line rather than suddenly having to go from switching from a rear turreted VK to the Maus. I mean, they kind of work, but I think the VK does work better in this scenario. So yeah, I will primarily be comparing it to the other two German heavy tanks. However, I will also compare it to the FV215B because it does kind of compare to it. But yeah, it is technically the worst tank. I do have better games, or at least I do better far more easily in the Maus and the E100 due to their armor layouts. Whereas the VK's got a very strange armor layout, and you really have to think about where to put this tank and what to do with it. You can't just angle up and side scrape like you can in a Maus and an E100. This is more a thinking man's E100, I suppose you could say. And that's actually a pretty good analogy for it. But yeah, it's kind of the thinking man's E100, only really due to the gun. But anyway, let's have a look at it then. So with improved assembly, it does have 2,756 HP, but you take that away, I think it has 2,500. Yeah, just about 2,500 or 2,600, around that sort of mark, which compared to something like the FV215B, which has got 2,100, or the E100, which has got 2,750, or the Maus, which has got 3,000 now, or even the Chieftain Mark 6, which has got 2,350. It does have a decent amount of HP, which is very nice to see. Yeah, if I was to put it onto enhanced armor, 2,600. So yeah, it does have a pretty decent amount of HP for a heavy tank. Probably one of the highest in the tech tree. If we were to compare it to something like the Russians, let's just compare it to an IS-7, which has got 2,500. So yeah, it's got a pretty decent amount of HP. And the armor is very, very strange. 200 at the front of the turret, 160, 120 side and rear, 240 frontal hull, 160 side, 120 rear. So technically, that should be pretty decent armor. You know, the front of the hull, the front of the turret, 200 plus it's sloped. You know, it's a very rounded turret. The front of the hull, what was it, 240 frontal hull? Yeah, 240 frontal hull. Pretty decent. I mean, it does have a weak lower glacis, and it does have 160 side armor. And in theory, that makes it to be a pretty good armor layout. However, we've got to obviously take into account the weak lower glacis. That's the typical German stuff. Plus, obviously, front-mounted transmission. You get shot in there, decent chance of engine damage. But 160 side armor should, in theory, be okay for side scraping. But the problem is, it extends to this bit, which is the rounded rear where the turret sits, so where the turret ring is. Where it's got this rounded part here, it flattens out. So this thing here is pretty much 160. And that means you can't really side scrape it. Because if you do try and side scrape it, people would literally just aim right here, where it's 160 pretty much flat, and they'll just pen straight through. And so you will very easily find yourself getting penned if you're trying to use this tank as a side scraping heavy. The best way I found to use this tank is going hull down or poking out with your frontal hull to bait a shot. That's the only way that's the only way I can really get this tank to work. Hull down positions is very good. The turret armor is pretty strong. You can get through the sides of the turret, because up to about here, where you've got the gun mounting, right here, up until about here, it's the 160 side turret armor. The only really 200 front you have is where the gun mantlet is, and of course no one's going to shoot there because you've got the extra armor from the front, from the actual, you know, gun sleeve sort of bit here. So no one's really going to shoot there because it just won't pen. So people will either try to go for your side of your turret when you're frontally on like this, or they'll try and go for these weak cheeks of the tank. It's a bit like the mouse. People will always go for the cheeks of the mouse turret because those are the weakest points of the front of the mouse. Even though the rest of it's sloped, if you just miss the cheeks, it will bounce. But if you do manage to hit those cheeks around here or here on the mouse, it'll go through. Same with the VK. If you manage to hit this at a decent angle and don't get an odd angle where the shot sort of goes wide, hits the sloping and bounces, you will easily be able to pen here with a decently high penetration gun. But if you do keep wiggling your turret, or you just keep it in cover, you know, if you waggle it like this, you'll have a far more decent chance of a bounce. So yeah, really the best way of dealing with this tank, to actually do well in it, is to either peek a boom and just expose yourself for a fraction of a second to take that shot, or hold down, wiggle your turret, or bounce a shot off of your front and bait the shot that way with the only real decent part of the armour of this tank. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird armour layout, like I said. I seem to do well in it, like I say, but it's not going to be for everyone, and it is a bit of a learning curve to figure out how this tank works. It is a lot like playing the FE215B in that sense, where you have got decent turret armour, but your hull armour is absolutely very weak and you can't really side scrape in it. So employ the same sort of tactic as you would with the FV as you do on the VK, because they're kind of the same sort of deal, just with a much bigger gun on this thing, which has got obviously a longer reload time but more alpha. So yeah, they are kind of comparable. Obviously the VK does have slightly better armour than the FV, but it has to be used in a certain way, the same as the FV's does. So yeah, there's that. 267 meters view range, yeah, nothing too amazing there. 24 kilometers per hour average speed, 10.5 power to weight ratio, 18 degrees turret traverse, 22 hull traverse with a 1284 horsepower engine, bearing in mind I have got engine accelerator on. So yeah, overall mobility not that great. Compared to the E100 it is better, but only just. It's ever so slightly faster than the E100, so like I say, it is a bit like the thinking man's E100. So yeah, it is ever so slightly faster, but it's not exactly a fast tank. I mean, is the FV faster? Yeah, the FV is faster. So something like the FV, the Chieftain, maybe even the IS-7. Let's have a look. IS-7 mobility, yeah. IS-7s will out mobility you. It's not a particularly fast or mobile tank. You do have to remember that. Mediums or lights get onto your sides and rears. There's nothing that you can really do to stop them. You're just too slow to back into a corner or to cut them off from circling you, and yeah, your hull and turret traverse just is not good enough to keep up with them. So yeah, again, weakness in the same regard as the E100, just without the armour. So yeah, there's that. Mobility wise, yeah, really not that great. Weighs 122 tons. There's your answer. As for the gun, again, like I say, it is kind of a thinking man's E100. You don't get the option of having a 128, however. So those of you who like to run the E100 with the 128 for whatever reason, you don't get the option here. It's 150 or bust. But it is otherwise pretty comparable to the E100's 150mm gun, the 15cm Kampfwagen Cannon L38A. With a 5-second aim time, 0.34 dispersion, 16.5 second reload time with gun rammer, 258 6mm average pen with AP, 334 with heat, and 85 with HE. 640 average damage with AP, 550 heat, 960 HE. 7 degrees of gun depression. I believe it has more on the sides, but don't quote me on that. It does actually have a pretty decent gun depression slope here, as you can see. Otherwise, it would be about 5 degrees, which 7 degrees is all right. It's not the best. What does the mouse have? Mouse has 8 degrees of gun depression. E100 with the 150 does have 7 degrees of gun depression as well. And yeah, again, it is pretty much the same gun as is on the E100, except it's got the designation A, so it does have a slightly better aim time, same dispersion, and a slightly worse reload time in comparison to the E100, but otherwise it has got the same average damage, same average pen, and the same gun depression. So yeah, very, very similar in regards to the E100's gun. So yeah, it's I have got improved control on there. Let me go with that. So yeah, the gun itself is decent. It packs a nice punch. It does reload slightly slower than the E100s. It does have 0.02, is it? Or no, point something better aim time, and it does have 0.34 accuracy, which is not too bad, to be honest. You can kind of snapshot things. I do find it does have fairly good gun handling, like the E100, so you have at least got that going for you. It is a decent gun. I do like the German 150mm at tier 10. They are very punchy, very satisfying guns to use, with a great sound when you fire them as well. And so yeah, that's the basics of the stats of the VK. It is pretty much just a thinking man's E100, which you need to think about what you're doing in it. You can't just drive up to an enemy and win like you can in an E100. So yeah, as for consumables, you've of course got your standard repair, first aid, fire. Got engine power boost, 20% engine power for 15 seconds. You've of course got your adrenaline for the extra load speed and chance of damaging enemy vehicle modules, and then you've got your multi-purpose, which is those three rolled into one. So yeah, there's that. As for your ammo loadout, you do carry 42 rounds. You're never going to get through that many in a battle, so you can go ahead, mix and match them as you want. Decent idea to keep a supply of HE, especially at the higher tiers with the amount of paper tanks you get. Leos, grills, waffles, Rheinmetals, those sorts of things. There's a lot of stuff you can pen with HE at this tier with the big guns. So yeah, good idea to mix and match them. As for provisions, you've of course got your standard and improved fuel for 3 and 10% respectively to engine power and turret reverse. You've got your chocolate bar and bar of chocolate for 3 and 10% respectively to group mastery. Then you've got your protective kit, which is all that lot. So you can go ahead and mount those as you want. Just bear in mind that you will lose credits in this tank. I do find I don't make that many credits in this tank, especially if you do fire off 7 or so rounds. The rounds do cost a lot of credits. How much do they cost each? 1,260. And yeah, the repair cost on this thing seems to be pretty high. And considering that it does have a pretty high skill cap, which is what I've been trying to avoid saying, but I think it has to be said, it does have a pretty high what did I say? Skill cap, there you go. You do, like I say, you do have to think about where you're going and what you're doing with it, otherwise you will very easily die and accomplish nothing. And that will of course mean you won't get any credits for the battle, and you will spend a lot of them on repair. So do bear in mind, do not be alarmed if you fail to make credits in this tank reliably. In most tier 10s, I can get a decent credit income, or at least some sort of credit income. The mouse, the E100, the Chieftain, those sorts of things. I can make an income with them because they're pretty decent tanks. But this thing, if you get focused a lot, or if you don't put yourself in a good position and you take shots, and you can't put shots back out in return, you will lose credits. Just bear that in mind. But yeah, so as for equipment, I'd say gun rammer, get that reload time down, otherwise it is a terrible reload time. You don't need calibrated shells. You have got decent penetration for the tier. Above 250 is decent pen at tier 10, so you've got 258, so nothing to worry about there. You have got decent pen. You might want to go for it for the heat and the HE pen, but honestly, I'd say gun rammer is a much better option for this tank. Improved modules for the extra track durability. As you saw, the tracks are pretty exposed on this tank. You don't have side skirts like on the Mouse or the E100 to protect them, so definitely this for the extra track durability. They will eat shots for you, which is very useful. Coated optics, because you are not a sniper. Well, you can be, but with 0.34 accuracy and a long reload time, longer than the E100s, it's not... I mean, you can, and with your armour it might work better at range. However, it is a very good tank for brawling in terms of the gun, so just bear that in mind. And if you can get yourself behind a rock and you can play peekaboo or you can bait shots, it is a decent tank for just brawling and dealing out big 700 alpha shots into people, so do bear that in mind. So coated optics is a decent idea for that. Enhanced gun lane drive, definitely get that aim time down. Improved assembly, because your armour, I'd say it's a toss-up, if anything. I'd say improved assembly for the extra vehicle HP. However, I can understand going with enhanced armour, but it doesn't really enhance that much. And to be honest, improved assembly I think is better. Engine accelerator, get that power to weight up to above 10. It gives you an extra top speed and slightly better hull traverse. Refined gun, definitely get that accuracy down to 0.34.5, which is fairly decent accuracy. Like I said, it does seem to have decent gun handling, so you can semi-reliably do snapshots, not as reliably as something like the Mouse or the Mausian, which does have like godlike gun handling, but this thing has got fairly decent gun handling. So refined gun, get that accuracy down anyway. Again, enhanced tracks for the extra track durability and allows you to get them up to a standard condition if you don't burn your repair kit, and then your choice of whatever the hell those two things are. So overall, I do enjoy the tank. I was expecting to not like it the same way as I don't particularly like the FV, because I just don't know how to play the FV. I think it's a decent tank when people play it right. Obviously, I just don't know how to play it right yet. However, with the VK, I've been having fun in it. I've been consistently coming, top half of the team, at least, when I play this tank, even if we don't win, which is a fair amount of the games. Let me just check my stats in this tank. VK. Here you go. So I've played 8 battles in it. Yeah, we've only won 38% of them. However, I have done, pretty, 3 wins, 5 defeats. Yeah, battles survive, I've only survived 3 of them. I do destroy 1.6 enemies per battle. I've got a 91% hit ratio, damage ratio of 1.11. Yeah. Average XP per battle 678. Yeah, fairly decent. So I seem to do pretty well in this tank, but you do, like I keep saying, you do have to think about what you're doing in it. You can't just drive up to an enemy or a corner and expect to bounce every shot that comes your way like you can in an E100, a Mouse, an IS-7, an IS-4, these sorts of tanks. You do have to be careful when you're playing this tank to do well in it. However, if you can get past that, it's a fairly decent tank. So yeah, that's the VK. I'll thank you for watching, and goodbye.